Chapter 137. We finished the Twin Towers on schedule, no overtime, alas, and on the 8th we began work on WTC7 as one group. The pace was more leisurely, with the extra hands and the sense that all was going smoothly and according to plan had settled into our psyches. It had become much the same as any other job. We turned up, we got our gear, we bantered here and there, said hi to the receptionists and security guards, and clocked off at 5 p.m. to head for home and rest our aching bones in Trump's lovely bathtubs, while George fried aubergines and courgettes and made us his mom's famous family recipes from down-home Texas, adapted, of course, for the non-meat eaters among the group, of which there were a surprisingly large number. On the 9th we had our day off, and some of the guys took Hitler rollerblading and bike riding in Central Park, and to the museums and galleries. He loved his art, and they told me later he'd had to admit that what the Americans had done with the world was probably better than his vision of it, had he won the war, with everybody marching in jackboots, saluting swastikas, and working in factories to make Volkswagen Beetles and rockets destined for the moon. I bit my tongue and kept within that he might not have jumped so readily to that conclusion were he somewhere other than a prosperous, mainly white park on a sunny afternoon, with its well-off parents and their blonde, cycle-helmeted offspring. Detroit, for example, or West Virginia, or some ramshackle part of LA, where tens of thousands of half-men, half-zombies live in rags under tarpaulins and freeway bridges, scraping the bottoms of barrels for whatever crumbs and gunk they can find to sustain their bodies through another bedraggled day. No need to upset the apple cart on his good times trips into the big one. AC must have picked up on it, though. My ill-informed anti-Americanism is generally writ across my face, despite most of my best friends hailing from there. And when the Fuhrer was off taking a nap, worn out from his rollerblading and museum traipsing, he was, after all, either 56 or 128, depending on which way you look at it. He sidled up to me and asked me what I'd thought when Hitler had commended the US over National Socialism. "Oh, I don't know," I said. I was just happy to see him so happy. "Limey," AC said. "I knows you was lying. Now you want to tell me the truth, or you want me to go bring OJ and have him tell me what you was thinking?" I looked over to OJ, lying on a rug playing Scrabble with Lieutenant Daniel and the General, and I swear I saw his ears prick. But if his concentration and gaze wavered for a split second from his rack of tiles, I didn't see it. "Come on, man," I said. "You don't want to go disturbing him from his game. Looks like he's got a good rack going on there." "Not as good as mine," said Martha as she passed behind us. I turned and watched her plump up her man-boobs and flick her tongue in and out at me. Probably in her real body it would have induced some sort of stirring of the old todger, but in her belching, beer-bellied, triple-chinned Mike Shaughnessy guise it was just weird and disturbing. She put her lips to my ear. "I know you don't want me now," she whispered, "but when we get back and I get out of these bones, I'm gonna make you my bitch. I got a stash of those little top-secret tins that'll turn a sweet little boy like you into such a pretty little thing. Haven't you ever wanted to know what it's like? You're not even a little bit curious to feel me inside you?" She flicked out her tongue and wobbled my earlobe. "I could show you a real good time," she said. "I'd split you in two and still have you begging for more." AC laughed. "Let him be, Martha," he said. "Limey ain't got what it takes to make it with a mama like you. From what I can tell, he ain't got what it takes to make it with anybody, unless it's his own right hand." More laughter from the pair of them, and from the guys playing Scrabble too, ears now diverted in our direction. I should have left it there, probably, and gone and sulked in a corner with a book, or sought out Rachel and moaned to her some, but I wasn't smart enough to resist the bait. "Now correct me if I'm wrong, AC," I said, "but in that motel room in Boise, there were just the two of us, right? And how many of us got up in the middle of the night to watch porn and do the five-fingered shuffle under the covers, thinking he was being quiet, but calling out some woman's name several times before the end? Hoots and hollers from the guys in the room, Graham and Rachel wandering over to see what was going down, Hitler sleeping like a bairn. At least, I said, I assume it was some woman's name. It's difficult to tell sometimes with you guys. At this, there was about a quarter of a second of a hoot and a holler, and then it was cut off in its tracks and replaced by silence. What do you mean, you guys? AC said quietly. I thought for a second and then laughed. Oh, I said, you think I meant you blacks. No, I meant you Americans, always giving each other weird names that don't make any sense, like John, oh, I don't know, let's just forget about it. I'm talking out my ass here. I don't want to get into an argument like this. Okay then, said AC. How about a discussion rather than an argument? Because I've been noticing about as long as I've known you some very weird anti-American vibes, which I find, in all honesty, a little peculiar given that you were longing to get back here and relive your glorious youth, to quote your words, the youth and the life you lost somewhere back there in your precious old England. Suddenly, I didn't like too much the way this conversation was turning. Suddenly, I felt like I was being called to defend a narrative that I was ill-equipped to justify. I'd been repeating all these things for as long as I could remember, and I liked repeating them because they made me feel secure and special and superior. Americans are stupid. Americans are fat. Americans don't know anything about the outside world and suck at geography and just go on for hours and have peas rattling around in their brains. Americans are superficial and boring and materialistic and obsessed with piddly little things that don't matter one bit. And those are the good ones. If they haven't wiped themselves out with crystal meth or pot or heroin or prescription drugs, and there's no health care, and they work too hard, and they drive big trucks, and they make stupid telly, and... I don't know, AC, I said. I'm out of my depth here. My characters are turning against me, and I get the feeling they're just a lot smarter than I am. You guys are full of confidence. You don't seem to fall prey to the same doubts that I do, the same inner battles that go on in my mind. I'm torn between painting myself as real and painting myself as ideal. And in the end, I probably paint myself as much worse than I actually am, for reasons I don't quite understand. I don't see the same conflict in you guys, the same awareness of your flaws and inconsistencies. I mean, look at you, OJ, the way you've changed over the past month or so, from when we first had contact, and the contradictions you've displayed. Same with you, AC, you're not the same person. You don't even talk the same. Who are you? Who have you become? I barely recognize you anymore. And yet, I said, a lump in my throat and a tear in my eye, and yet, I know and see that you're the same AC as you always were, deep down. And the connection that we share, despite these ups and downs we keep having, is as real as anything else I can think of. Same goes for you, OJ. And the same is starting to go for everyone, the more I spend time with you and the more I get to know you. But I'm so tinged with guilt sometimes. I still feel awful about writing you out of existence, Daniel. And then some of the things I've typed about George, just for a cheap laugh, playing up to some imagined audience like a goddamn dancing monkey, knowing some people will guffaw and clap to see a man like him brought down a peg or two, even if it's all make-believe. What goes on in my head, you know? What goes on in my mind? Where does it all come from, this stuff, this guff, this weird mishmash nonsense of thoughts and ideas and beliefs? I trailed off. I had nothing left to say. I looked sadly at the floor and kicked my shoes a little, but had not even the energy for that. Marlon, said Martha, holding out her hands and taking mine. I hope I ain't overstepping my bounds here, but I think I can speak for everyone when I say we all feel like that. We're all weird in our heads. We're all insecure and inconsistent and wonder what the hell's going on with this life sometimes. The only reason you think you're different to us is because you're aware of yourself from the inside, whereas you're only seeing us from the outside. You see me swagger around and spit and laugh, but what you have no clue about is just how many hours I've spent worrying about whether I've done the best I could do by my daughter, or mourning about my fading body and looks, or fretting over dumb things I said like 20 years ago. It's all going on inside, even if I do spit and laugh and piss. And you think I don't get confused, lost, scared, alone? You think that's something only you and a few others you know about feel? Look around you, man. Just look around you. I slowly lifted my head, and eventually I got it together to shake off sufficient dejection to meet their eyes. Everyone was nodding. Everyone was wearing sad, weary frowns, even as another part of them was alive with smiles and light. "It's the human condition," OJ offered, "and there's none more human than us." He stood up and hooked an arm around me, and once more we got to hugging en masse. "You're all right, Marlon," AC said. "Anytime you want to talk, let's talk. We ain't so different, you and I. Despite your bad teeth and superiority complex and pasty skin and stupid accent and the shit you guys call food and your terrible weather, lack of adventure, and God knows you plenty enough ugly-ass trailer trash of your own. And just because they've mostly got the decency to keep their stupidity to themselves don't mean they're any better than our trailer trash. Misplaced confidence can be a good thing. You should try it sometime." I laughed. Then I cried a little. "You see," I said, "why do I think your insults are just funny, whereas my own get me down?" "Could it be," said Rachel, "that AC's insults are in one ear and out the other, whereas the ones you apply to others are in your head the whole time? So it's no wonder that they weigh you down, since you've been carrying them for so long. And for what?" I thought about it. I felt overwhelmingly weary all of a sudden, like I was on the verge of some sort of breakthrough, but didn't quite have the energy to push on through. Another thing my old granddad used to say, "Americans are human too." That was a phrase he taught himself during the war, to not go mad while he was serving with them, to keep himself from screaming at them to shut the hell up and stop being so boisterous and whooping so much, to not talk so endlessly about themselves and things they clearly didn't have a clue about. He'd put a great many words into my young ears, my good old granddad, but maybe not all of them were for the best. Perhaps it was time to exorcise the ghosts of some of those words and phrases and constructs and ideas. His way of seeing the world was based on his own limited perspective and coloured by the place and the society he grew up in, same as mine. But perhaps there was a way to expand that perspective and base my ideas on something larger and more noble and... "I hate to interrupt," I heard Martha say, "but do you think we can stop hugging now and maybe move on? For one, my leg's going to sleep. For another, I really need to piss. This bladder of mine is by far the smallest one I've ever had. Martha's bladder, by God, I could go all day on that thing. Some of those shows we did, I would have needed to piss for like 5 hours of filming. But you never saw me dribbling one down my leg, did you? Not on camera, at least." She broke away and headed to the bathroom. "Tell it to your therapist, Limey," she said, a big broad smile on her face. "They don't pay me enough to figure out your shit, too." Chapter 138. When I woke the next morning, I felt refreshed and tender and blinked into the darkness like a newborn babe. I thought for a moment that I was back in my comfortable rented bed in Leeds, and I daren't move for a while lest I confirm it, one way or the other. Which one did I want it to be? The Trump International Hotel in New York in September 2001, bunked up with soldiers and celebrities come undercover operatives? Or my plain old, same old Yorkshire life in Leeds, with the dog that would want walking and the unfinished and unstarted writing projects, doomed to failure anyway, and the day that I never did quite manage to fill with what I hoped I would? How about maybe something in between, such as a dream in a bathtub in a motel in Boise, or a drug trip somewhere along the way, spiked or otherwise, the body unmoving, but the mind going on all kinds of adventures? How about AC or OJ testing some sort of far-fetched virtual reality device on me, as real as anything in this physical three-dimensional world of ours, and me having forgotten that's what I was doing? How about beamed up by space aliens in a field in Hampshire, or knocked unconscious in that car accident that time, and lying now in the middle of a 12-year coma? So many possibilities, and, like Schrodinger's cat, not a single one of them real until I opened my eyes and the world began. The one I wanted, I decided, was the one that was actually real, and the one that felt realest of all, and the only one I would have been disappointed not to wake up in, the one in which myself and 9 others were a merry band of brothers and sisters doing a job to save the world, with one more day to go until that job was complete. And, lucky for me, Chapter 139. It was the final day and spirits were a mixture of high and low. We'd done our jobs well, of that there was no doubt, and we were even ahead of schedule, but the closer the 11th came, the less it became about working out the schedule or thinking about lunch or rolling paint on surfaces, and more about shuddering and flinching as we envisaged those aeroplanes slamming into the buildings we had by now spent so much time in. Already they were somewhere out there, in the air or standing on runways and making their inexorable journeys towards their final resting places and their dates with destiny. It was weird to think that everything was doing that right now, and that they always had been. Not just the people and the pilots and the flight attendants and the crews, ironing uniforms, checking boarding passes, packing suitcases, and hoping beyond hope that they didn't miss their flight, running downstairs and into taxis and cursing anyone that got in their way. But every single panel and nut and bolt of those jets that had one day emerged from the ground as a raw piece of metal and been beaten and shaped by robots and men to be transported across the nation and the globe to one day come together with a million other components to form the giant bird that would wing its way effortlessly across 1,000 skies until the day, yes, it made me shudder and blew my mind, and brought a somberness to proceedings that I felt I could detect on the others' faces, though, as ever, it's possible I was just projecting. I sought out AC and asked him one last time if there really was no way I could sacrifice myself to avoid all this and still have everything work out all right. He looked me hard in the eye. "To be honest, Marlon," he said, "it's like a 1 in 1,000 chance. We looked at it every which way we could, and don't ask me why, but those timelines just won't stay in one place, won't do what they're told. Them's not great odds, whereas this, fucked up though it is the only thing that guarantees the world as we know it will survive beyond about 2035. We stood in silence for a while, our rollers suspended and dripping over trays. "Who knows," he said finally. "Maybe Q's got something in mind and the whole thing is geared towards that. I'm just glad you rose to the plate and did what you needed to do. Speaks a lot of you as a man, despite that weird shit you got going on in your brain." He punched me gently on the arm, and we broke into a pair of smiles. "You're a good man, AC," I said, feeling once again the fondness I held for him in my heart. "Shit," he said, "you don't know the half of it. But come on, let's get this finished. If we get this done early, I'll give you another whooping on the pool table." "Another," I said. "I'm pretty sure I don't even remember the first one." AC laughed. That memory of yours, Limey. You better get that thing looked at. We got some guys back at the base who could sort that thing for you, and then you'll remember who won at pool." We left it there, and I went back to my painting. But then I got to thinking about OJ, and I just figured, God damn it, wasn't there one last chance to throw myself into the sacrificial fire and save the day? Something about the whole thing told me AC wasn't seeing the full picture, but OJ, it appeared, was. I asked the general where he was, and he told me to head up to the 33rd floor, some office there OJ was working on. I got in the elevator and was subjected to a rather lovely Muzak version of The Doors' Light My Fire. Over too soon, and then when I absent-mindedly emerged with a ding, I walked right smack bang into OJ and sent the two of us flying to the floor, along with a bunch of paperwork he had been carrying. I rose and stooped to help him pick them up, but he tried to usher me away, grabbing as many papers as he could. He wasn't quick enough, however, to prevent my eyeballs noting the contents of several of the sheets. Court records from the People vs. O.J. Simpson, and tax documents showing that his 2001 self had a much more enormous debt than he'd previously told me. "What the fuck?" I said, grabbing another one of the papers and reading as fast as I could. This says that you've been masquerading as a secret government operative and enlisting the help of gullible others in order to escape jail time and multi-million-dollar debts to the IRS, as well as selling government secrets to terrorist factions both within the US and overseas with the aim of perpetrating a major attack on American soil so as to foment war in the Middle East and enable the establishment of lucrative contracts that will benefit those with prior knowledge of events and investments in certain specific corporations to the tune of many trillions of dollars, as well as helping them monopolize oil markets and pipelines and remove obstacles to American expansionism such as foreign dictators and non-cooperative governments which, I took a breath here, will destroy the lives of hundreds of thousands of people but allow a few dozen men to become far more wealthy than any human could possibly need to be. I huffed and puffed. It was a lot of words to spit out, especially after such a surprising collision. Again, I said, noting that the date on that particular paper was, perplexingly, March 2017. What the fuck? Limey, OJ said, gathering up his papers in a little more orderly fashion. Marlon, he said, probably using my actual name as a way to try and wheedle his way into my confidence. It's not what you'd think. I don't know what I think it is, I said, other than something I think the rest of the group would be interested to see. They already know, he said. They all know. You're the only one who doesn't. But there's a really good reason for this. If you'll just let me explain, I started backing away from him. Something was telling me that he wasn't necessarily as trustable as I'd thought him to be. Maybe Rachel had been right, or maybe she was in on it too. Though, to be honest, I'd started to go off her anyway, the more I'd gotten to know her. She just wasn't the same now that she had a beard and a dick. Limey, OJ shouted. Look out! But it was too late, and the elevator doors I had just stepped out of, and which had, inexplicably, for the first time ever, failed to close, can you believe the timing, had made it possible for me to back into and fall down the elevator shaft. We were on the 33rd floor, remember? Or 32nd if you're doing UK stories. And I guess that meant I was very obviously plummeting to my death, given the height, which was clearly a drag for anyone in my shoes, and in my shoes I was. Chapter 140. OJ peered over the edge into the darkness. Limey, he shouted. Marlon, are you down there? I'm here, I said. Seems like my boiler suit got snagged on some sort of hook or something. I'm okay, but, think I should try and get out of here pretty soon. The elevator's on its way back down, and my boiler suit is slowly tearing, what with it bearing the responsibility of my entire weight. I seem to be falling about an extra half an inch every 2 or 3 seconds. And, well, who knows? Maybe there'll just be one giant rip and I'll be a goner. I stopped talking and waited to see what he would say, but there was only silence. OJ, I shouted. Are you up there thinking about whether you should let me fall to my death or whether you should save me? Are you being pulled by 2 separate and contradictory forces, one being the bond that we've built up over these last 6 weeks, and especially the last 11 days since we met in person, and the other being the knowledge that, more ripping, that I saw what was on those papers you broke into that office to steal? Rip, rip, rip went my boiler suit, and clank, clank, clank above me went the elevator. But it was still quite a few floors away, and it looked like people were getting in and out of it, so I figured we still had ample time on that front. OJ, I shouted, are you there? I think if you... Uh-oh, here comes the elevator again, and this time it looks like it's not stopping. Ay caramba! Oh, but it did stop, presumably to let some office workers in or out. Thank goodness it was nearing home time, and the lifts were busier than they would have been a few hours earlier. But rip, rip, rip again goes my fabric. I'm dangling quite precariously now. This really is looking like a hopeless situation, especially with no one there to save me. Then, would you believe it, just as the elevator started moving once again, surely this time to visit me with the squishings and the death, I saw OJ's round face appear over the edge and watched it lower towards me like a dark descending moon. Hold on, Limey, he said. Just reach up with your hand and grab on. I'm almost there. Once more the elevator descended. It was only 1 floor above us now, and this time for sure it wasn't stopping. "It's too late, OJ," I shouted. "Save yourself and don't worry about me. I'll just work my way free from my suit and take my chances with the fall. Rather that than be squished by an elevator. And I may yet land on something soft. Stranger things have happened." I heard the grinding of the elevator once more and grabbed the shredded bit of fabric that was at once keeping me safe and at the same time holding me in place for a crushing. I yanked myself free and closed my eyes as I prepared to go into freefall, drawn towards the very center of the earth by the mysteries of gravity. Except I didn't move. A hand had grabbed me by the collar and was now hauling me up to the open doorway. It was OJ, and it wasn't OJ. It was a hand, but it wasn't a hand that was attached to an arm. It was difficult to understand and explain, especially with all the excitement of what was going on. I rolled back into the corridor and lay there next to a heavily breathing OJ, laying flat on his back, just as the elevator zoomed past us. 2 Aris Isotona gloves lay there with us, one wrapped around his ankle and connected to a heating pipe, and the other still holding onto the back of my collar. Suddenly, I realized what had happened. OJ hadn't been ignoring me or debating what to do. He'd rushed off somewhere to grab his famous gloves, and, because of whatever weird and wonderful properties they possess, seems they're actually sort of alive, and maybe even sentient. They'd managed to lower him down the elevator shaft and, between the pair of them, make up the extra foot or so that was necessary to reach me, just in time to avoid a crushing or a plummet right at the exact second that I ripped myself free from that hook. What were the chances, huh? Chapter 141. "I told you," said OJ, panting. "I told you there was a perfectly good explanation for those papers." He grimaced for a second and gripped his chest. Was he hurt somewhere? He didn't seem to be. "Sorry, OJ," I said, figuring he really was one of the good guys after all. But you can imagine how it must have appeared from my point of view, especially that one dated 2017, and seemingly making out that you were using me for some seriously nefarious and profit-oriented purposes. "That fucking paper," he said. "I knew I should have left it at home. But I thought this would be a fitting resting place for it, along with the others, which of course I explained right at the beginning of the book. Those things," he said, trying to smile, "well, they were still real too, and we might as well kill as many birds with as few stones as possible." Efficiency, I thought, and nodded approvingly. That made sense to me. Even if his crimes were a ritualistic setup and his money problems a smokescreen fiction, it seemed logical that he would want to destroy the only copies of the papers relating to them. "So what was that other sheet?" I said. "That was planted," he said, "by someone working on the inside, someone working for the dark side, someone trying to get you to switch sides. They'd attempted to put it in your room, in your backpack, in your robe, and in your boiler suit, and every time we'd foiled them. It was designed to undermine your confidence in me at a critical juncture, so that you wouldn't make the journey back here, and their evil scheme wouldn't be thwarted." I nodded again, and watched him grimacing and gasping for breath, and wondered if maybe something more serious than being a bit puffed out after running to find a pair of gloves and then dramatically rescuing someone who had fallen down an elevator shaft was afoot. And again I said, rather than chuck it away in a bin somewhere in 2017, or feed it through a shredder, or get one of your scientist boys to zap it with a laser, you brought it here because... "Nostalgia, I guess," he said. "Call me a sentimental old fool, but..." He broke off and squeezed his eyes tight and grabbed his chest. "And the gloves," I said. "Where did they come from? Thought you'd burned those in your jail cell." OJ lay quiet for some time, barely breathing. Then a few short gasps for air, then some spluttering and a little trickle of blood from the side of his mouth. "In the office with the papers," he eventually managed. "Evidence drawer. I figured they'd go down with the building, though, truth be told, they always appear whenever they're needed. And it doesn't matter how hard you try, you can never truly get rid of them." I had this image then of those gloves being the power behind the whole show, the mysterious guiding hands that were directing everybody, pulling all the strings, conducting the orchestra. What if they were hands belonging to some interdimensional being, the hands of God, or the hands of the force, energy, intelligence they called Q? What if God and Q were one and the same? Or what if they were two different but similarly powerful beings or concepts or deities? Who would win in a fight? Maybe, even, they were two siblings, perhaps the good ones, and there was a third sibling called Lucifer or Satan or the devil or Ahriman or Loki or Moloch or Baal, who lived in the waste disposal system beneath Area 51, banished there because of naughty things he'd done to his brothers and their parents/parents, but always trying to get out. Maybe... Marlon, OJ said, weakly grabbing the end of the length of fabric that had torn away from my boiler suit and using it to tug me closer to him. I'm dying. I always knew it would end like this. Say goodbye to AC for me. Tell that tell that wonderful man that I love him. Tell him yourself, a voice sounded from behind us in the corridor. It was AC, striding purposefully towards us. Don't worry, OJ. I've seen how this is done. Leave it to me. He reached over and grabbed OJ's Aris isotoners. He began shoving them into his mouth. OJ struggled and spluttered and coughed them out. AC, goddammit, he hissed, with admirable strength given his condition and how feeble he'd been the last few minutes. You have to wait until they're dead before you do that. Unless you were trying to kill me yourself. You can hardly resurrect someone when they're still breathing, can you? OJ laughed weakly, and AC managed to chuckle too. I probably would have laughed as well, but I was too busy thinking about how, in movies, if the plot calls for someone to die, the other people just shout no or give them a cuddle and cry. But if it doesn't call for them to die, the other people give them CPR and mouth-to-mouth, and back they come. There doesn't seem to be much in between, nor very many occasions when the CPR goes on for like 20 or 30 minutes like it does in real life, with paramedics arriving partway through and death not being confirmed until much later, probably back at the hospital. And not that I was just uselessly and idly musing on these things either. I was trying to use my knowledge of both real life and films to work out which way it was going to go with OJ, and to figure out the best way to help him. But now, with the resurrection angle thrown in, that seemed to complicate matters. For example, maybe not doing CPR and letting him die, and then doing the gloves shoved in the mouth thing, might actually be the quickest way to get on with him being alive and back to normal again. It was confusing. And it was all immaterial too, for just 3 quick clonks later, clonk, 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 we were all bashed on our heads and knocked unconscious and taken off to some office to be tied to chairs and laughed at by a very naughty man indeed.